Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Managing Editor of Canada's Podcast. Joining me today is Scott Crockatt, who is Business Council of Alberta's Vice President of Communications. Thanks, Scott, for joining us today.
Thrilled to be here with you, Mario.
All right, let's talk about a announcement that you folks have made regarding the coalition of different business councils in the West. And tell me a little bit about what's happening and the reasons for it.
Absolutely. Well, Mario, this has been a dream for some time. This is about uniting the West. And so, very recently, we've been proud to announce the Western Business Coalition. This is a group of business associations that represent quite a large number of businesses across Canada's four Western provinces. British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Ever since the earliest days of the Business Council of Alberta, this has been something that we've been excited to do because so many of the challenges and opportunities that Canada has are similar across these provinces, and together we represent just an enormous amount of the vibrancy and economy that is Canada. And to just give you a sense of that, I put the number 30% in the heads of yourself and your listeners. About a third of Canada's population lives in these four provinces, more than 12 million people. About 30% of Canada's land area is in these four provinces, and actually a little more than that in terms of the overall economy, 35 or 36% of Canada's overall economy. And so this is an initiative to say, we need to get Canada on the right track and in terms of its public policy, in terms of its economy. And this is the four Western provinces coming together to really provide some thoughtful ideas for how to do that. And one of the places that we've decided to start, for reasons that I'd love to get into with you, is to say natural resources have got to be a big part of that.
Okay, so tell me what you folks are looking for when it comes to natural resources, and let's preface this by just just mentioning how that sector has always in the last few years especially been under fire, right? For a number of different reasons, mostly the environmental side of things. So what are you guys looking at in terms of that sector and where you want it to go and what you want to do for it?
Absolutely. So these four groups came together. I shouldn't mention them. It's the Business Council of British Columbia, the Business Council of Alberta, the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce, because they function in a very similar way in Saskatchewan, and the
Yeah.
Business Council of Manitoba. And when we came together, we said, what would make the biggest difference for the Canadian economy in terms of a change in policy direction? And you
Yeah.
set it up in your question. Really, for the last number of years, there's been no sector of the Canadian economy more beat up than the natural resources sector. We've just seen a lot of policy rowing in the wrong direction, and at best, the potential has been stifled, and at worst, it's been really held down and even damaged by it. So this is an area where we think there's huge opportunity, and these are nonpartisan organizations. So we'd say we want any party to take up these good ideas, but no matter who's in charge of Canada's next government and next chapter, natural resources has got to be a huge part of it. So that's the project we started with, and I'll tell you about the next ones that are coming a little bit later, because this is in many ways Canada's number one or number two most productive industry, depending on how you look at it. The next government of Canada is going to have to make life better for Canadians in many ways, and they're frankly not going to have unlimited fiscal capacity to do that because we just aren't in a fiscal position. And all those factors add up to say, hey, if we can energize the productivity and the prosperity that the natural resources sector brings forward, we can really benefit Canada overall. And across these four provinces, natural resources means a variety of different things.
Yeah.
We've got teams of policy people and CEOs of businesses working collectively together on five areas. Oil and gas, as you'd be very familiar with, and we certainly are in Alberta, agriculture, mining and critical minerals, forestry, and actually aquaculture as well, which is obviously probably most relevant to British Columbia. But this is sort of the total package that we're looking at of these ideas and how we can unencumber these industries.
Tell me where where this fits in the sense that the voice of the West isn't being heard and hasn't been heard in Ontario and Quebec especially, and especially on Parliament Hill in Ottawa.
I think it's absolutely fair to say that there is both a long-standing and a nearer term sense that that the West doesn't always feel like its voice is as strong as some other areas of the country, or that its issues are as well understood. And, in my many years, and you and I have been doing these roles for quite some time. In my many years of doing this, it's been my impression that actually a lot of sometimes what the West perceives as negative feelings towards our viewpoints is actually just a lack of awareness and understanding. Other parts of Canada don't necessarily do forestry or aquaculture or agriculture to the same extent that the West does. And so, we're really starting from a positive place, not necessarily saying that there's anything that we have anything negative to say about other areas of the country, but to sort of stepping into that opportunity, saying that if we don't feel like our voice is well enough heard, well, then we need to develop a stronger voice. And I think having each of these provinces that span just such a large area of the country speaking together and collectively is really important to do that. It's hard to ignore, right? When you have this much of the country speaking together. And I actually hope can be a little bit of an antidote to some of the Western alienation sentiments that we've had before, if we can show the rest of the country that the powerful force that the West can be to achieve everyone's goals.
Mm-hmm. So where do you go from here after this?
Okay, so I said we're beginning with natural resources because that's some really low-hanging fruit, and boy is the timing right for that as well. In
Yeah.
that we're under pressure from our long-standing neighbor and best trading partner and longest best friend, but boy do we need to energize our own economy, and natural resources is a great place to start with that. The next projects involve Canada-U.S. trade. I think, frankly, while we're in the middle of the tumult of this relationship at the moment, what we'd really like to fast forward to at the end of this sometime in the future is a better Canada-US relationship than we have right now. Actually, more Canada-US trade than we have right now, and also trade with the rest of the world. So that's one of the second projects that we'll be doing. And another one of the second projects is on interprovincial trade barriers. Now, I know, I've had journalists turn around and walk away from me when I've talked about interprovincial trade barriers, because they've said, I'm sure you'll feel this way too. We've been talking about this for my whole career and nothing ever happens, or very little ever happens. But I truly believe we're in a little bit of a watershed moment here. I'd be interested if you feel the same way, because you talk to so many people, but where, for a long time, Canadians felt like interprovincial trade barriers were a bit of an irritant. They thought mostly about things maybe like what beer or wine you can buy in what province. Didn't really realize that this is like a 20+% tariff that we're putting on ourselves just by having these trade barriers up, and this sense of Canadian pride and perhaps putting Canada first that has been given to us by this very challenging geopolitical moment, I think is actually an opportunity when we might be able to knock down some of those walls that for my whole lifetime have been very difficult to penetrate.
Mm-hmm. Like, how much of I'm just curious about this aspect of it. When you look at other countries, do other countries have these interprovincial barriers that like Canada has had over the years?
In many cases, they do not. Mario, there are a variety of reasons why Canada has some of the interprovincial trade barriers that we do. The number one reason is that we are a federation of provinces, and there are some different rules that apply to each. But you can look all over the world, and not only is it easier in many other countries to do business between their provinces or states, in many cases it's easier to do business between two different countries than it is between two different provinces in Canada. And examples of this abound. If you think about two countries that in many ways share a lot of culture and other commonalities with Canada, being Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand generally have fewer trade barriers between those two countries, much more labor mobility between those two countries. If you're certified in a certain trade, you can do it very often in the other country than we have between our provinces. I was born in the beautiful city of Lloydminster, directly on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Yeah. And I can tell you it's full of examples, big and small, of how we're just getting in our own way. Some of them are even silly. There's a street in Lloydminster when on one side of the street, you can have a painted wooden ladder, and on the other side of the street, it's illegal to have a painted wooden ladder. Surely in a country like Canada, we can do better than that. And surely we can come up with common standards for certifying tradespeople, for certifying, chefs, for figuring out how
Yeah.
goods can be transported on our roads. I think this is the moment when Canadians are saying, this is about more than beer and wine, and let's do something about it.
All right. Thanks so much, Scott, for joining us today.
This has been really fun, Mario. Look forward to doing it again.
All right, wonderful. That was Scott Crockatt, who is Vice President of Communications with the Business Council of Alberta. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Managing Editor of Canada's Podcast. Thanks for joining us today.